On this podcast, we like to discuss the most recent installment of a different series every show. Today, that's a little-known Canadian drama called Essex County, which just released its third episode Sunday, April 2nd. The show is based on a collection of graphic short stories by Jeff Lemire and tackles themes like loss, family, and identity through a set of interconnected families. The show stars Molly Parker, Brian J. Smith, and Kevin Durand. It's Wednesday, April 5th, and you're listening to today's episode. In order to watch this show, you had to go onto your VPN, log into Canada, and watch it on the Canadian website. This is limited to only being available in Canada, yet it stars a prominent cast. Molly Parker from House of Cards, Lost in Space, Kevin Durand from Lost. He was in Real Steel a long time ago.
I remember he was also on Wild Hogs.
Yeah, but I think that this show is destined for Netflix. Because like I just said, Molly Parker, House of Cards, Lost in Space. There's the Netflix connection. Kevin Durand, Lock and Key. He's a main character in that. Brian J. Smith. You might not know him, but he was in Sense8, which was like a cult hit.
Yeah,
for
it came
Netflix.
out like 8 years ago or something.
8 years ago? Has it really been that long?
I mean, yeah.
And then, most importantly, though, the guy who created the graphic novel and is also like heavily involved in this show because he's the one who I think did the casting, even, as well as some of the writing. But Jeff Lemire, the dude has written a lot of graphic novels. He's done Black Hammer for Dark Horse Comics, but he's also created the comic book Sweet Tooth.
Yeah, no, okay, so that was where one of my comparisons came in, Sweet Tooth, because it focuses so much on the kid of this series. His name is Lester, but he even looks a little bit like the Sweet Tooth kid as well, and I think he's playing around the same age, maybe a little bit older, like 10 years old.
It makes sense, because Jeff Lemire is known for like trying to stick his own childhood into the stuff that he makes.
We must have talked about it before when we did the Sweet Tooth podcast.
I'm sure, but Sweet Tooth is actually coming out with its second season at the end of this month. We're obviously not going to do it because we only do shows once, but I found that really interesting. But what network is that on? It's on Netflix. So that's why I think not only is it going to make its way to the U.S., because we've done a CBC show before. We did Coroner years ago.
Oh, that's right.
And Coroner then made its way into the U.S. via CW. Right? So they always tend to trickle in if they're good enough. But this has the cast for it. It has the writing for it, the background for it. And also the show's director, Andrew Cividino, he is from another CBC series that made it big, Schitt's Creek, that only made it big once it made it to Netflix.
I didn't know that Schitt's Creek was originally just in Canada.
I think it took until its third season before it took off. It was like Black Mirror, where it really needed that bump from an international audience. So you've got the creator, the cast, the director, and the network all having strong ties to Netflix. So if it doesn't get absorbed by them, I'm just pitching that right now. But also, all the actors are Canadian. They must have sounded like they were where they were from.
It was strange. Right? Kevin Durand, he has this weird accent throughout the whole entire
That's his
thing.
real voice.
That was not. I've heard him in his actual voice. This was not.
That's just an American accent he puts on.
No, this was like a weird mumbly type of thing.
Yeah.
But I did want to compare it really fast to Stranger Things, just kind of because of the tone of it all, because you do get these surreal scenes, and it makes a lot more sense that it was kind of a graphic novel now.
Yeah, you should start with a plot description, because I don't think anybody knows it because no one's seen this.
Yeah, so like I said, it's mostly revolving around Lester. He's this kid, he's around 10 years old, and then Jimmy, played by Kevin Durand, that is his actual dad, who I guess that he's kind of secretly meeting up with, because Claire, who was his mom, who I think died either maybe in the first episode or before the show started, was with this other person named Kenny. Kenny is Lester's...
I believe he's his uncle, from what it says here.
Oh, I thought it might... Well, he's basically his guardian.
Yes.
That's what it is. And he would obviously be very mad if he learned that Lester was hanging out with Jimmy, because that was Claire's wish. He didn't want Lester to have anything to do with Jimmy. Jimmy decided to come back when he learned that Claire was sick. We kind of get a little bit into that in this episode. And then we learn about Anne.
Well, before you jump to Anne, I did want to talk about one storyline at a time, because like I said, these were short graphic novels that were then combined into the trilogy Essex County.
Oh, okay, interesting. So it was
and then became a novel.
So they just kind of focused on one character for each
Well, this is how Tales from the Farm, because that's what Lester's storyline is. This was the description they give. 10-year-old Lester is sent to live with Uncle Ken on a farm in Essex County after the death of his mother. And just based off that, it reminded me a lot of Hunt of the Wilder People, that Taika Waititi movie that took place in New Zealand, where the orphan was sent to live with that one couple, and then the mom dies, and the person who's taking care of him sort of is gruff.
I'll say that it was strange because whenever they first went to Lester's storyline in the third episode, I wasn't sure what this show, because we had already seen some other storylines as well that were kind of darker, what this show's like audience was trying to be, because it seemed like whenever we went to Lester's storyline, it was always, he was just being a kid, and it seemed almost like a kid's show. The first scene we see with him is he has a cape on, and he also has a mask, and he's like pretending to speak on this walkie-talkie, and then he's like going up to this attic, and then he's like speaking to Kenny, and Kenny lets him drive the combine tractor. And
are they getting along?
Yeah.
Or is there any grief in this? Or
there's grief. There's grief by the end of this storyline, but this was at the beginning of the episode, and I was just wondering.
So it's just a kid going about his day.
It seemed, and this was definitely the most wholesome part of the show.
Yeah,
so
it's kind of the heart of the show. It was the easiest to translate over from the comics, and it's also the part that they never really had a problem with when they were just writing it out. It's the one that stuck true over the years that it took for production to happen.
I'm not surprised in the slightest.
So you liked this part?
Yeah, I mean, this storyline was interesting, and then you even get Lester. He is lying to Kenny. He's like, I'm going to be down at the creek with some friends, but he really just goes into the woods and meets up with Jimmy. At first, I wasn't sure because we already know that Jimmy is Lester's dad based off of an earlier conversation, but I wasn't sure if Lester knew that because it seemed like from the previously, it might just have been one of those things where like he was meeting up with someone who he just thought was a stranger. I was glad that they kind of cleared it up because it made that storyline less creepy.
Yeah.
But, you see Lester and Jimmy and they're like playing and they're pretending, and again, that was very wholesome. So I was really enjoying this storyline.
How'd you like being jumped right into the third episode? Because this is like the halfway point in the series. It's only going to be 5 episodes.
It's only going to be 5 episodes.
So did you feel like there was enough before and after that, or that it was setting up for enough?
I'm very surprised that there's only going to be 2 episodes left in this season, but I guess based off of what happened in this episode, like with one of my pros even, is that they got through so much just in like the 43 minutes that they had.
Great.
Not even just with this storyline, but everything else as well.
Sure, you can move on to the next storyline.
So yeah, then we have Anne. I think she's a therapist.
She's a nurse.
Yeah, she's a nurse, and we saw from the previously she's going to be helping out with her Uncle Lou. He's this guy who's very old, and he's also very grumpy like throughout the whole episode. The first scene we see.
Do you learn anything about him, like that he has any sort of disease? Because from this, I'm waiting for you to say something.
Disease? I mean, he was. I think he got in like a crash or something like that.
He has Alzheimer's.
Okay, that's what it is. This must have been probably early stage Alzheimer's as well, because he's still able to recognize, I think, who Anne is.
Okay, I think it plays more into like the backflashes and
how
they.
It makes one scene that happens after the intro make a lot more sense because he's speaking to, I think a doctor, and the doctor is like, pick 3 things in this room, and then he like picks 3 things. He's able to write it down,
and then he has to remember it at the end of the appointment.
Yeah, well, it turns out that Anne is like just kind of trying to sweep up the house, so he's getting really distracted from the sounds in the back, and like you see later on in the scene, the doctor asks what were the 3 things were, and he just does not remember.
Yeah, that should be a dead giveaway.
But he was also able, like for example, the doctor asked him to draw a clock, and he's drawing a clock, and when the doctor asks him what were some of the 3 things, he says clock. So it's one of those things where it's like, I don't think he was in his late stages yet.
Yeah, no, that's the exact type of neurological test that they do for people who have Alzheimer's. So that plays into Anne's storyline. Does Anne do anything else besides hanging out with Lou?
So the intro scene is actually just all about Anne. In fact, there's very little speaking in it, and that's what I like so much about it. We learn that Maggie, who I think was Anne's daughter, just decided to, I think it was last episode, leave for either an internship or she's just moving somewhere else. And we see that Anne is kind of depressed about that because she's just going about her day picking up groceries, and then we get this intermixed with a backflash of Anne when she was younger, like putting clothes on.
What did you think of that? Like when they did that, did it look like her? Yeah. Whenever they do flashbacks, you have to test whether or not, because we just did Great Expectations, where they jumped up 5 years and the actor sort of looked like himself, but like how did?
It looked like her. In fact, even the person, because the whole entire point of the intro is that when it's the younger Anne, she's like putting clothes on a clothesline, and then Maggie runs up to her and like hugs her, and the person that they got to play the younger Maggie also looked like the Maggie from
cool.
present day. So yeah, I mean it was nice, and again
the younger Anne, you mean? Yeah.
Yeah. But I like the fact that like it just didn't have any speaking, and it was a nice intro in and of itself. But that's kind of where Anne's storyline picks up. She also knows Jimmy, and Jimmy, I guess this episode, also at the very beginning, speaks to Anne and lets him know that he's actually seeing Lester, but that also he wants to try and find his own place and possibly even live with Lester if that's like an option. Anne's really not that big a fan of that. And those are the three storylines we really focus with most this episode.
I think for most of the series.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I wasn't sure if there was anything else, like if there was another storyline or anything like that.
Well, again, the two other stories to the original, Ghost Stories, which is the second book of the trilogy, follows Lou LaBeouf as a former hockey player who is now living in the retirement home in Essex County. And The Country Nurse is the third book, which we meet Anne in, and she's the nurse who provides care to all the residents in Essex. So I'm assuming she makes her way around to a lot of different people, but it explores how she forms relationships with her patients and how she deals with her own life stuff. So that's probably to do with Maggie. But it doesn't seem like there's like all too much. There's no like supernatural stuff happening. It's much different than Sweet Tooth because you're not.
That's why I was a little surprised to hear you say that it was
dystopian.
Based off of like a graphic novel.
Yeah,
because
this was his first like breakthrough one too.
There's different points where it seems like it could be kind of dystopian or like people have powers. For example, it all makes sense in the end. But Lester, in like 10 minutes in, he has a vision, and suddenly this is when I realized that the show was really good with cinematography. Like we see it just suddenly cut to a cornfield. It looked really nice. It actually kind of looked high budget for I think what the show probably had. And we see, we don't see Claire's face, but we see like an outline of her just kind of in the cornfield. Mm-hmm. And then we cut back right away to Lester, and we see and hear Claire. We see her hand like kind of graze his face, but then he wakes up and there's no one there. And so it's like you had these like these really nice subtle tone things.
What is like the climax though? Like where's it going?
So okay, we can like skip to the very end of Lester's storyline. Basically, he's just hanging out with Jimmy. Jimmy has even talked to him about possibly living with him, and we hear Lester like I think 25 minutes into the episode even speak to Jimmy, and he's like, I don't want to live with Kenny anymore. I want to live with you. He's obviously having such a great time with him. Kenny told Lester right before he went to the creeker, so he thought to come home before dark. So he decided, and when he saw that, he went into Kenny's room and saw Lester's drawings, which has kind of been like a storyline throughout the episode because Kenny always wanted to see Lester's drawings, but Lester wasn't showing it to him, and that was because Lester was drawing pictures of who else?
So he
Jimmy.
figured it out.
Yeah, and I think that Kenny must live like at some type of gas station or not like an actual house.
Jimmy?
Yeah, Jimmy, that's what I meant.
Yes.
Because Kenny shows up to that place, and then there's like this tense exchange between Jimmy and Kenny, where basically Jimmy is like, hey, I'm going to be able to see my son, there's nothing you can do to stop it, and Kenny is just trying to get Lester home and like kind of just stay away from Jimmy. And so I assume that like probably if there's 2 episodes left by the finale, we're going to get some more closure because a fight doesn't break out. In fact, Jimmy even tells Lester to go home with Kenny, but it seems like the tensions were pretty high anyways.
So is it slow? Is it like a slow burn or?
I would say so, especially when you got to the scene, because mostly after Lester and Jimmy play in the woods or whatever, they go to this restaurant, and there's a lot of scenes where they're just talking, and it seemed like it kind of did hit a drag. And
what are they talking about?
It was mostly just Lester being like, I don't want to live with Kenny anymore. I want to live with you. And also why Jimmy ended up coming back. Again, that was because Claire was sick, but by the point that he came back, Claire had already passed, and he felt kind of bad about that. All other storylines kind of hit a drag as well, and she is just kind of living at her house, and then Doug, who I think has been cheating on her throughout like this series, kind of came back, and he was apologizing for it, and then weirdly enough, they actually like have sex. It was a weird scene to see right after you saw the scene of Lester and Jimmy hanging out. It kind of jarred me a little bit because it was like, I thought that this was supposed to be wholesome. Now it's like going into this weird type of territory. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Maggie does call Anne for like one scene this episode. She feels like even though she's like going to be having this internship, she kind of wants to take a year off and come back. And then Anne is like, no, I want you to stay there. So these were all storylines I had seen before, but I think that the show did a good job by the final 10 minutes because that's when we get really our closure with Lou. Not as a character, just for the episode. We first off, it was shot really nice. I like the way that you saw Lou because
he's back in the cornfield.
It was almost. It was a flashback scene, and it was one of those flashback scenes where I was like, "What's happening?" at first, because you see him suddenly outside of this restaurant. It looked really nice. It was all orange, and Lou is kind of like turning around, not really sure what's happening. We saw that he was for some reason burning old photographs and newspapers in this fire, and it was like kind of making me question a lot of what was happening, but. We see a flashback. It's younger Lou, and it's younger Beth. I guess Beth was someone that he was into, and I think Vince might have even been Lou's brother.
Possibly.
This is
the family relationships are all interconnected.
This got a little hard. If that's the case, this does kind of remind me a little bit of the Big Door Prize in a plot summary that you said, because it seems like Lou is into Beth, and Beth is supposed to be dating Vince, and I think Vince is Lou's brother. So it's like this weird love triangle.
Yeah.
And it was really crummy what Lou did, because Beth, they're all hanging out at this bar. I think that they're like all were just coming back from a hockey game that they played at or something. And Beth was about to go home, and then Vince was like, "Oh, I'll go home with you." And Beth was like, "No, enjoy your time." And Vince was like hard. He was like, no, I want to go home with you. And Beth is like, no, it's going to be fine. And that's when Lou comes in, younger Lou, of course, and he's like, "Look, I'll take her home. Everything's going to be fine. You can just stay here."
Everybody's saying everything's going to be fine all the time.
As they go to this house, it turns out that Beth is pregnant, and it's probably Lou's child as opposed to Vince, and then they have sex. I thought that the way that they did it was kind of nice because it was really subtle in that way. But
you called him like a scumbag just a second ago.
Because of the fact that he was cheating on
Vince.
Yeah, and so in the end, at the very end of the episode, Anne comes up because apparently when he was going through this whole vision, the barn had gone on fire. I guess because he was just kind of really not paying attention.
Oh, because he was lighting things on fire.
He was lighting things on fire in this trash can, and then I guess it tipped over, and he really wasn't, there. And then Anne was speaking to Lou. Lou's holding on to a photograph. She takes it, she turns it on its back, and she reads that it's a picture of her, and that's, I think it's supposed to signify, and I wasn't 100% sure, but I think it's supposed to signify that
she was the baby.
She's the father. Yeah, Lou is her father, and her father, who she thought was her father originally, she already had to go through the same type of thing with.
Like a whole dark scenario.
Yeah, so it was pretty dramatic in that way, and I thought that it was really nicely done.
Okay, so what would you give the episode?
I would give the episode a 7, and I was originally going to give it a 6, but I really thought about like all the storylines and how it seems like every single scene kind of had to interconnect to one another, and they did so in such a nice job that I was like, you know what, despite its flaws, despite it being a little slow, despite some of the jarring tone shifts, 7 out of 10.
Did it remind you at all of Lost Ollie?
No, not really.
The reason I ask is because it's got that family dynamic to it. It's also got the fact that Shannon, whatever his face was, the director, based it off his hometown, and this was also based off the guy's hometown.
At the very end of the episode, funny enough, similar to popped up in different shows, and Heartland did pop up, and even though I do think this is better than Heartland is, I do see where the comparison comes into play, because Essex County, you kind of are getting a full, it's really a show about just that county in general and all the different people inside.
Do you think anybody carried the show or did like a phenomenal job?
I always like Kevin Durand, and I was glad to see him in this episode because
didn't you just say he mumbled like most of it?
I said that he had a weird accent,
okay,
but he was the one character that I recognized, and I probably would say he was my favorite character as well. He's supposed to be the protagonist. I think between Jimmy and Kenny, you're not supposed to hate either one, but I think you're supposed to really like Jimmy more.
All right. Well, Molly Parker is the one that they called the linchpin of the series. When she was cast, she was the one that really they were like, well, we can make something from this.
She's the moral center in the show, I would say. And that's also another pro about the show. Every single character has their goals kind of outlined, and you can tell which character is supposed to be what.
And it sounds like one of those shows where no one is particularly evil.
Yeah.
And And then the other one that just occurred to me was that Samuel L. Jackson show where he was playing someone with Alzheimer's.
The Last Days of
Do you
Someone
remember
Gray.
how they intertwined like the past with his logic, like where he would get lost in the past for a second? Did that remind you at all to what happened to Lou at the very end?
No, actually, you know what Lou's part reminded me most of?
Yeah.
I won't give away what happens in the show, but towards the very end of season 4, Scoot in *Halt and Catch Fire*, what was his name? Do you remember the main character's name?
Yeah, Scoot Mary, but like
he has a montage that's very similar to the way that
Gordon.
His montage at the end of season 4 reminds me a lot of Lou's kind of backflash that he had.
Sure. I think I know what you're saying. Okay, so one last game, and then we'll end it from there, okay?
Okay.
Jeff Lemire. He's done a lot. Like Marvel, DC, lots of comic books, but he's created a lot of characters himself. And I have 3 different creations here. One of them is not real.
Okay.
And I want you to see if you can guess which one is fake. So one is called Descender. And it is a science fiction space opera comic book series about a young robot, Tim 21, on the run who figures out his connection to the downfall of robot civilization.
Okay.
And then you have Gideon Falls, a horror comic that follows 2 seemingly unrelated characters, a washed-up Catholic priest and a young man living in the city obsessed with trash.
I feel like I've heard of Gideon Falls before.
Yeah, or it just sounds like a really cool title. And Animal Cannibal, a zany comic about Tim, a second-rate chef who ingests an undercooked meat only to gain the power to transform into any animal that he's eaten.
That sounds 100% true. That sounds like that. Out of all, there's only 3, you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, I would go with the first one, the robot one.
Descender?
Yeah.
That is 100% true. It's a space opera, too, which I don't know how they pulled that off.
Okay, so it's the second one then.
The second one is also true, Gideon Falls. Yes.
Wait. You're saying that the
fake.
raw meat one was the one that you came up with?
Yeah. Animal Cannibal, a zany comic about Tim, a second-rate chef. I'm saying it again for anybody who wants to make it. Ingests some undercooked meat and gains the power to transform into any animal he's eaten.
Did you use ChatGPT for that last one?
No.
Okay, because I'm just saying that sounded so true. I'm like shocked right now.
What influenced me was he did an Animal Man. And Animal Man sounds like a cool comic. He didn't create that one, though, so I couldn't use it. So I decided Animal Cannibal sounds pretty cool. All right. Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.